Courage is a powerful word. You can see why when you look back at its Latin origin, cor, meaning heart, and then consider today's dictionary definition, mental or moral strength to venture, persevere, withstand danger, fear, or difficulty. Historically, and not so long ago, the word courage and courageous was reserved for describing superheroes or Greek gods or cartoon characters such as the cowardly dog and historical heroes, perhaps like Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, Anne Frank, Amelia Earhart, just to name a few. It certainly wasn't used to describe executives, leaders, managers, teams, or any other members of the work culture. In fact, historically, leaders were seen and celebrated for being stoic and powerful with a more command and control approach. Tell, teach, plan, organize, and never let others see your weaknesses was traditionally the way to lead. Oh, and of course, keep your feelings and emotions separate from your work, or else you won't be respected and may come across as soft or unprofessional. The words courage, vulnerability, and trust were words used in counseling, psychiatrist offices, but not in boardrooms or executive offices. The virtue of courage refers to your will, digging deep to find motivation to accomplish goals despite challenges arising within or around you. Courage, in fact, is the first virtue that Aristotle speaks about in detail in his writings. And like all virtues, the virtue of courage deals with the golden mean. That is the midpoint of moderation between two extreme points, which should be avoided as they either represent excess or deficiency. For example, too much bravery can cause recklessness, and too little becomes cowardice. Sort of that Goldilocks effect. The aim is to find that just right spot on the continuum, that golden mean. I'd like you to pause just for a moment now, and in your journal or your notebook, consider the questions on this slide and jot down your responses, your thoughts. The dictionary definition of courage is the quality of mind or spirit that enables a person to face difficulty, danger, pain, etc. without fear. There's another definition that states the perceived consistency of action under adverse conditions. Courageous leaders lead with principles. They lead with their true north. It guides them when pressure mounts. They don't shrink bold actions because they fear failure. They don't need external adulation, nor do they shrink from facing criticism. There are literally thousands of competent managers who can run organizations efficiently, but very few with the courage to transform their environment. I thought you might enjoy this very famous quote by Maya Angelou. Individuals with courage do the right thing, even though it might be unpopular, actively discouraged, or even result in a negative outcome for them. They show an unrelenting determination, confidence, and perseverance in confronting difficult situations, and they rebound quickly from setbacks. So what happens in a school when people do show courage? Generally, decisions are made despite uncertainty. You will find opposition to bad decisions. And politics and bureaucracy tend to wither because innovation tends to thrive. Now, conversely, what happens to a school when people lack courage? People tend to go with the flow, even when the flow is based on bad decisions or is perhaps headed in a bad direction. Rather than maximizing the upside, people focus on minimizing the downside. Kind of muteness prevails as people understand that contrarian view is not welcomed. I'm going to ask you to pause once again and go back to your journal or your notebook and reflect on what we've talked about so far and see if you can think back to an occasion when someone stood up for you. Was it easy for that person to go against the herd? Is that memory sharply edged in your memory? If so, why? A number of thought leaders have published around the concept of courage in leadership. We're going to explore several of those. You may even want to take note of similarities and differences as we explore. First, we're going to look at Mary Crossan and her colleagues, and they have identified 5 character elements that they say contribute to the leadership virtue of courage. First of all, they talk about a brave leader, a leader who does what he or she believes to be right, even in the face of adversity. Brave leaders stand up for personal beliefs and values, and they stand up for others. Next, they talk about the determined leader, the one who displays resolve. He or she stays committed to seeing things through. Daily life as a leader can be hard, and it tugs at us and tempts us away from the course we're trying to stay on. Determination is what keeps us on that course. Now, that being said, some undertakings are truly impossible, and it makes little sense to remain determined in the face of insurmountable obstacles that could potentially lead to escalated commitments and wasted resources. So it's very important for leaders to know the difference. But when the undertaking is not impossible and the outcome would make a significant difference in the lives of the others, determination can be the fuel that makes it happen. Then they talk about being tenacious. Being tenacious is very closely related to determination. A tenacious leader finishes things despite obstacles, difficulties, and discouragements. Tenacious leaders work hard over extended periods of time, and they follow through on their goals. If you remember your history lessons, or if you've been watching the Netflix series The Crown, as I have, you may recall that Winston Churchill was a leader that embodied tenacity. One of his most famous speeches eloquently defined tenacity as he saw it. He said, "We shall not flag or fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and in the oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender." Next, let's take a look at being resilient. Resilient leaders withstand difficult conditions and endure. They recover quickly from setbacks, and as the old saying goes, they believe that which does not kill us makes us stronger. Mary Carson and her colleagues suggest that we think of the Peanuts comic strip and Lucy and Charlie Brown and the whole football kicking piece. While we might not admire his judgment, Charlie Brown certainly was resilient. And then there's confidence. Confident leaders demonstrate self-assurance in their abilities, decisions, and actions. Like courage, confidence can be contagious when modeled by leaders. Franklin Roosevelt was famous for the words that he spoke in his first inaugural address. He said, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." Americans at that time in history took great courage from his display of confidence. It's time again to pause, to think, reflect, and to maybe write some things in your journal or your notebook. Can you think of a situation in the past where you did not, in retrospect, match up to your own standards of courage? What stopped you? What did you learn? Courageous leaders make unpopular decisions and stand up for unworthy goals. They often exhibit confidence and resilience, and usually do not fear confrontation or difficult conversations. They calculate and take measured risks, and they keep their self-righteousness in check. In reality, courage in any leadership role can be demonstrated in small moves, as well as in large ones. In general, courageous acts are an expression of the individual standing up, being committed to the team goals. Courageous leaders are willing to take a stand for things that will bring about positive change. Thought leader Rushworth M. Kidder, founder of the Institute for Global Ethics and an advisor on many other ethical research boards, has made moral courage a subject of his studies. In his book entitled Moral Courage, Kidder identifies 3 elements of moral courage: a commitment to moral principles, an awareness of the danger involved in supporting those principles, and a willing endurance of that danger. Kidder posits that in order to be morally courageous, you have to honor each of these 3 components. You have to have principles, really value them, and be astute enough to apply them, prioritize them in an ambiguous real world. You have to recognize the risks and look honestly at the consequences of both action and inaction. And you have to draw on your character and your experience to give you the faith that allows you to take risks for your principles. If you don't work with all 3 components, you end up with a lopsided and ineffective counterfeit of moral courage. If you know your principles and are willing to endure hardship, but you haven't really assessed the risks of action and inaction, you'll end up exhibiting foolhardiness or self-righteousness. If you know the danger and can endure it, but you're not acting on principle, you're exhibiting a different virtue, simply physical courage. If you know how your principles apply and you know the dangers, but you don't think you have the character to stand and fight, then you are exhibiting timidity. Take a few moments to study this chart. This summarizes the differences that Rushworth-Kidder finds between physical courage and moral courage. Many times, these are confused. Based on over a decade or more of observation of ethical individuals across the spectrum of humanity, Rushworth-Kidder asserts that moral courage doesn't always produce immediate benefits. For him, standing up for values is the defining feature of moral courage. Having values is different from living by values. In defining moments of our lives, values count for little without the willingness to put them into practice. So for Rushworth-Kidder, courage is all about assessing risks and standing up to hardships they may bring. He offers what he feels are the 5 core moral values: honesty, respect, responsibility, fairness, and compassion, and suggests that the courage to do the right thing is about as concise a definition of moral courage as you can find. In essence, he suggests that moral courage is very simply the courage to be moral. Kidder offers a 7-step model or moral courage checklist. The first 5 steps pertain primarily to decision-making about whether to exercise moral courage in any given situation. So assess the situation, scan for values, stand for conscience, contemplate dangers, and endure the hardship. The 6th step talks about avoiding the pitfalls to moral courage and what moral courage isn't. And then the last step is practical advice on how to develop moral courage. Kidder's description of moral courage, or the courage to do the right thing, is not presented as an easy option or one that every person should choose regardless of the consequences. He recognizes that we often face situations where our values conflict within ourselves, moral dilemmas. Ernest Hemingway defined courage as grace under pressure. The compelling thing about that definition is that it brings together both the actor and the act. Those who are morally courageous tend to be so because they trust that if a principle is upheld, the right thing will be done, and hopefully good will result. They tend to invest themselves in trust, not for what it does, but for what it is. And for them, principle trumps the transaction. They may be trustworthy, but more important, they are trustful. Leaders demonstrate courage when they overcome fear to pursue worthy goals. Please take a few moments to think about and journal in your notebook or your journal, what acts of courage have you seen either in your personal or professional life? And what forces act upon those people to influence their actions? Harvard Business School professor Nancy Cohen says that a courageous leader is an individual who's capable of making themselves better and stronger when the stakes are high and circumstances turn against that person. Most of our lives, she says, we are beset by crisis, and courageous leaders are not cowed or intimidated. They realize that in the midst of turbulence, there lies an extraordinary opportunity to grow and rise. She suggests that while there are a range of workplace competencies that characterize effective leadership, there are also key emotional traits and behaviors that professionals need to access and nurture in order to bring out the best in themselves. Among those, the trait is courage. She offers 5 characteristics of a courageous leader. First, she discusses authenticity. Cohen says that authenticity is foundational to courageous leadership. A recent study found that followers' perception of authentic leadership serves as the strongest predictor of their job satisfaction, organizational commitment, and workplace happiness. Research also shows that organizations which are comprised of leaders who are true to themselves demonstrate improvements in both followers' trust and performance. The first step to becoming an authentic leader, Cohen says, is to focus on self-improvement. She says authentic leaders begin with the will and the commitment to work on themselves, day by day and week by week. Next, she talks about resilience. Leadership can be challenging, and when complex problems arise, you need to be prepared to meet them head-on and be resilient as you work toward a solution. Resilience is the capacity not only to endure great challenges, but to get stronger in the midst of them, Cohen says. She adds that resilience isn't something everyone intrinsically possesses, but that it's a learned capability that leaders can hone with experience. She notes that each time we navigate through a crisis and find a little strength in it, we're able to pick out an insight we can learn from. At the same time, if we resolve not to get bitter, weaker, or smaller, or more frightened, but rather to get a tiny bit braver. A leader's ability to do this is profound not only for him or herself, but also for the impact it exerts on others and a larger mission. A keen sense of emotional intelligence is also vital to being a leader who can collaborate with others to achieve organizational goals. Emotionally intelligent leaders are more adept at demonstrating a willingness and an ability to change, which in turn enhances trustworthiness and boosts followers' buy-in when it comes to change initiatives. Cohen says becoming a leader who is attuned to your emotions requires a willingness to cultivate, enhance, and deepen your self-awareness and to learn to trust it. When she talks about self-discipline, she notes that in addition to building self-awareness and a deeper understanding of your emotions, you need to exercise self-discipline and demonstrate poise, even in the most trying circumstances. Cohen says we live in a world that's characterized by one nonstop crisis after another, like waves breaking on a shore. When facing a crisis, we need to be prepared to lead under pressure and remain composed. A key initial step is to take stock of the circumstances surrounding the situation at hand, rather than acting prematurely. Cohen says that if we realize in the heat of the moment that nothing an individual leader can do to solve the whole situation, you're better off acting from your strongest, calmest self than you are taking your first reactive, immediate action. Finally, she talks about a commitment to purpose. Purpose is critical to both individual and organizational success. A recent report shows that 96% of leaders believe that purpose is important to their job satisfaction. So for you and your school to reap these benefits, it's imperative to consider how you can be more purpose-driven and leverage your organization's objectives to instill your team with a sense of mission. Cohen encourages us to seek to empower our followers by delegating tasks and sharing leadership responsibilities. Through such actions, she says, you can inspire faith in your followers and ignite their desire to perform at their very best. So what does courage have to do with leadership? Well, courage may separate out effective leaders from ineffective leaders. And it also can be a differentiator as to whether a leader has influence or not over his or her followers. Courage actually has a lot to do with leadership, or we should say actually leadership has a lot to do with courage. Now, if we were to wordsmith and combine the definitions of leader, leadership, and courage that you see on this page into one sentence, we might come up with something like this. A great leader is someone who has influence and can effectively motivate a group to act towards achieving a common goal because they have the mental and moral strength and will persevere and withstand danger despite their fears and difficulty of the challenge. So think about that. Is that someone you'd like to work for? Is that someone you go the extra mile for? With that type of a definition of a great leader, can you begin to see the role that courage plays in leadership? Can you begin to see that it's not just a component of leadership? Perhaps it is something that is at the core or the foundation of what a great leader is. On this slide, you can see quotes from some very famous thought leaders, and they're talking about what they feel and what they understand about courage. Take time to read each of these quotes and jot down your thoughts as to whether you agree or disagree, and perhaps come up with your own statement in your journal about courage. A recent Harvard Business Review blog featured an article entitled "The Role Courage Plays in Leadership." That author suggests 7 ways that courage plays an important role in leadership. First of all, that courage builds influence through trust. The fastest way to gain influence with others is through trust that's created with authentic and honest connections with others. Because if people don't trust you, they won't listen to you. And it takes courage to be authentic and share your strengths and weaknesses with each other because that involves vulnerability, and vulnerability is often uncomfortable. But the more real and authentic you can be, no matter what it is that's being said, the more trust you can build with others. And the more trust you build, the more influence you have. Next, courage builds accountability. The biggest reason people avoid holding others accountable is because they're afraid of the outcome and what will happen during the conversation. They're either afraid of how uncomfortable they will feel or how the recipient will feel and respond. With courage, you feel that fear, but you do it anyway because it's the right thing to do. With courage, more people can hold each other accountable despite their position or rank in their organization because they're not afraid to stand up or call each other out. Number 3 is the courage to build capacity for conflict. Just like accountability, we often fear conflict with others because it feels uncomfortable and we don't know how to work our way through it. Conflict can be anything from challenging someone's idea in a meeting and having productive, spirited debates to emotionally charged confrontations and issues between individuals. Either way, conflict is important and necessary in organizations, small or big, and learning how to have healthy, productive conflict is key. With courage, people are more likely to stand up and challenge others, challenge ideas, take responsibility for themselves, and engage in necessary conversations to solve problems. Courage grows our capacity for conflict by helping us to embrace the fear and discomfort that comes along with it. Fourthly, courage builds moral strength and integrity. Sometimes it's easier just to go along with things instead of speaking up, even if it's about something wrong or immoral. But this is how employees and leaders become bystanders and enablers of unacceptable behavior or activity, and this is when work environments become toxic and employees disengage. Courage gives individuals the strength to speak up about things that aren't right or should not be tolerated, even if it's uncomfortable to do so. And when people can do that, a safe, open, and accepting work culture is created where people want to come to work, they want to engage, and they want to show up as their best. Courage also builds collaboration and teamwork. As courage helps to build things like trust, our capacity for conflict, and moral strength, collectively through these elements, it helps to form the building blocks for collaboration and teamwork. Because teams won't work together well and people are generally not willing to collaborate and share with others unless they can trust, feel respected, and feel emotionally safe around them. Courage also builds the capacity for taking risk. Risk is a necessary ingredient for growth, innovation, creativity, and success, but it can be a scary thing because the success or fail nature of it. With risk, it wouldn't be risk without the element of failure. And to risk failure in the pursuit of growth and success involves vulnerability. If a person fails, they are vulnerable to rejection, humiliation, embarrassment, and so on. With courage, organizations and individuals are more willing to fail in the pursuit of success, and they're more willing to try new things because they see their failures in a positive light as learning and growth, as opposed to something negative and permanent. Finally, courage builds engaged, dynamic, creative, and inspired work cultures. How people feel at work determines how they're going to engage at work. Organizations that value courage create work environments where people feel safe, respected, and acknowledged. When people feel this, they're free to be innovative, to take risks with new ideas, to admit their failings and weaknesses, to motivate others, to engage in spirited debate, to challenge themselves, to challenge others, to hold others accountable, and to contribute to the collective goals of their organization. On slides 19 through 23, you're going to go through a self-assessment exercise. Researchers have developed this scale for measuring professional moral courage as one of the leadership competencies. The items in this self-assessment are useful for showing what courage involves in organizations. Please take the time to assess yourself on each slide and score yourself by theme by adding and dividing by 3 for an overall score. And you're going to add all the scores and divide by 15. Now that you've completed this scale, please take some time and think and write in your journal. What extent do your responses reflect how you view yourself? What perhaps surprised you about the assessment and or your responses? What can you learn from this exercise? And for your own personal growth, what do you see as your strengths and where are your growing edges in terms of moral courage? Courageous leadership sometimes means taking the tougher road, and often this happens publicly. You may remember the example of Chelsea Sully Sullenberger, the pilot who disobeyed instructions and risked the 155 lives by landing a U.S. Airways plane in the Hudson River some years ago. He later courageously spoke out about the failings of the airline industry. Difficult decisions, although it can be certainly tempting to hide during tough times, are things that courageous leaders do not shy away from. Difficult conversations, while few of us enjoy them, and many of us would actually prefer to send text messages or emails, but these modes may not really offer the advantage of a clear and consistent message. The danger is that these types of situations, communications such as those that you send in an email or a text message, can end up on social media, or even worse, on the evening news. While many leaders prefer to give bad news later in a discussion to ease into it, research tells us that receivers prefer to hear it first, get it over with. In fact, scholars have identified good reasons for delivering bad news in person. First of all, you have the ability to use and detect body language, and you can also clearly convey respect and sensitivity. Communication experts argue that difficult conversations typically involve disagreements, defensiveness, and resistance. And they suggest these can be mitigated by demonstrating supportive behaviors such as empathy, equality, and description. Essentially demonstrating understanding, relating to people as equals, and explaining issues clearly and objectively. If you remember the presentation on crucial conversations, you may recall that Carrie Patterson and her co-authors define crucial conversations as a discussion between two or more people where stakes are high, opinions vary, and emotions run strong. They suggest that people tend to handle these types of situations either with silence, which might also include sarcasm, sugarcoating, avoiding, or withdrawing, or violence, which is controlling, labeling, or attacking. That being said, courageous leaders have difficult conversations without going to either extreme. A direct approach to difficult conversations would seem to be the best approach, and that does take courage. It's human and natural to want to avoid discomfort, but it does seem that the better strategy is to work through it. Being uncomfortable is a sign that we are engaged in something important and difficult. Discomfort can inspire us to forge ahead, to take the opportunity to improve a relationship, even if the conversation is difficult. Business leader Kim Scott supports the direct approach. She encourages the practice of real candor for leaders at any level of an organization. She nudges leaders to care personally and challenge directly. The chart on this slide is an example of the options one might consider when someone sends an email that forgets to put an attachment there. Kim Scott promotes the idea of leaders bringing their whole self to the workplace. She advocates for the importance of knowing each other well, building caring and supportive relationships, and she really encourages people to connect on that human level. While people often fear communicating directly, either initiating or receiving, eventually the result is that people work better together. Kim says the most surprising thing about radical candor may be that its results are often the opposite of what you fear. You fear people will become angry or vindictive, and instead they're usually grateful for the chance to talk it through. And even when you do get the initial anger, resentment, or sulliness, those emotions prove to be fleeting when a person knows that you really care. As the people who report to you become more radically candid with each other, you spend less time mediating. When radical candor is encouraged and supported by the leader, communication flows, resentments that have festered come to the surface and get resolved, and people begin to love not just their work, but whom they work with and where they work. Kim Scott acknowledges that people do get emotional in workplaces, but that is not a reason to avoid tough conversations. She recommends acknowledging emotions instead of ignoring them, and take a break in the conversation if necessary. Courage has been called the difficult virtue because there is a problem of excess. Having courage does not mean you're right. Courageous leaders have to keep themselves in check. Otherwise, they may be considered self-righteous, smug, moralistic, as though only their view is the right one and others' views are wrong. Courageous leaders have to watch out. There's a danger of using force or coercion. Leaders who use force may not be confident as they think they are. It's critical that leaders care for their followers and not steamroll them. As leaders, we need to watch ourselves, ask ourselves, is my view the only right one? Courage can help us to manage through ambiguity. A courageous leader considers nuance and can discern what is right from many different perspectives. One simple test for self-righteousness may be to ask whether we can receive negative feedback without being defensive. Can we accurately assess feedback? And if it is accurate, can we change our stance? Having the confidence to live and lead by our convictions is good, but not if we don't consider others, and not if we use them to justify our courage. Joanne Trotta is the managing partner and founder of Leaders Edge Incorporated, and she suggests that one danger is that as leaders become increasingly entrenched in their roles, they can become a bit too comfortable and casual, and they err too often on the side of playing it safe when situations actually demand them to be courageous. The truth is that leadership and courage are inseparable qualities. And sure, leaders who lack courage may speak with authority, and they may be able to leverage their status in a way that drives tangible results. However, the people who work for them can see through the veneer, and they notice when a leader operates with a courage deficit, and it has an impact on how these employees approach their jobs. Trotter suggests that some of the qualities that separate leaders from merely adequate ones are the ones that you see on this slide. The ability to initiate, participate in difficult conversations. The ability to inspire people to take their efforts to new levels, the ability to handle criticism and setbacks gracefully, the ability to create accountability among workforce, the ability to act and follow through decisively, the ability to give credit where credit is due, the ability to tell the truth, the ability to listen, especially when the truth is difficult to hear, and the ability to actually challenge the status quo. These qualities are all connected with courage. Without bravery, leaders simply do what is easiest or what will create the fewest waves. Leaders who lack courage do not want to rock the boat, but instead they may keep a tight grip on the way things are, despite the promise of the way things could be. Trotter talks about 7 lessons for leaders. First, she recommends don't run away from conflict and discomfort. Courageous leaders see conflict and discomfort as areas that are ripe for transformation and growth. They don't retreat from difficult interactions, they welcome them. If you want to lead with courage, learn to recognize those times when you're feeling fear. Then, instead of running away, move forward to the root of the issue and face it head on. She also says we should accept failure as our friend. No matter how hard you try, you'll never be able to eliminate failure from life or work. You're going to fail from time to time. Your people will fail. This is normal. Failure is going to happen, but when you face it with courage, you can use it as an amazing opportunity for growth. Third, she says, be accountable. In order for you to grow from failures, you have to accept them. You have to hold yourself responsible for your own mistakes. Show your people that you're just as accountable for your own failures as you expect them to be for yours, and you will rise then to a new level of leadership. Fourth, she says we should set standards and expectations boldly. Determine what's reasonable to expect from yourself and your followers, then raise the bar just a little higher. Playing it safe with expectations and standards is a sure way to lose courage. Don't be afraid to ask your followers to aim a little higher, and be sure to challenge the expectations and standards that you have set for yourself as their leader. Fifth, she says we should sharpen our decisiveness. The longer we lead, the more likely we are to hem and haw and avoid making tough decisions. At the end of the day, people are looking to you to make decisions. That's what leadership is all about. Avoid procrastination with your decision making. You want more yes and no and less maybe. Finally, she says we need to delegate. You may think that taking on more work than you can handle is courageous, and it's a huge mistake. Learning to delegate effectively is one of the most courageous things you can do as a leader. It requires you to trust people, let go of control, which can be incredibly scary. When you delegate effectively, you show people you trust them, you build courage among your workforce, and you get more done. As hopefully you can see now, courage is not something outside of or a small component of leadership. It's actually the foundation of good leadership and great work cultures. So as a future leader, perhaps the first step is to start with courage and see where it takes you. Because as you can see, when you combine courage, leader, and leadership, this is what you get. A great leader is someone who has influence and can effectively motivate a group to act towards achieving a common goal because they have mental and moral strength and will persevere and withstand danger despite their fears and the difficulty of the challenge.